The Strait of Hormuz, 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. Every single day, roughly 17 to 20% of the world's petroleum supply transits this corridor. Tanker after tanker, loaded to their maximum draft lines, threading through a bottleneck that the geography of the region has made irreplaceable. On the northern side, the Iranian coastline stretches east and west, studded with sensor arrays, coastal defense batteries, patrol boat stations, and the forward positions of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, a force that has spent 4 decades studying a single question with obsessive institutional focus. How do you defeat something that is, by every conventional measure, vastly superior to anything you can field? The answer was never about matching capability. It was about exploiting geometry. The strait is a kill box by design. Anything transiting it is predictable. The navigational lanes are fixed, the depths are constrained, and the civilian traffic density makes aggressive maneuvering during transit both dangerous and escalatory. A warship threading the Hormuz corridor cannot simply accelerate and change course the way it might in open ocean. It is locked into a transit geometry that any competent adversary can model, plan around, and exploit. The IRGCN has had decades to build that model. In the early hours of this particular morning, they demonstrated exactly how deep that preparation had gone. The destroyer had been on escort duty for 73 consecutive hours. 3 tankers, flagged separately, carrying refined petroleum products under international contracts, were moving southbound through the strait, their massive hulls low in the water under full cargo load. The destroyer ran parallel to their track, positioned between the convoy and the Iranian coastline, its radar arrays spinning continuously. The crew was tired. Not the fatigue of a bad night's sleep, but the accumulated bone-deep exhaustion of 3 days at sustained operational readiness with no genuine stand-down periods. The intelligence picture in the 72 hours before departure had been increasingly specific in ways that could not be dismissed. Not operational intelligence with clean targeting data. That quality of advance warning rarely precedes an event. What the analyst had was a convergence of indicators, elevated activity, at multiple IRGCN coastal positions along the northern strait. Communications traffic suggesting coordination between geographically separated units, resupply movements to forward positions that implied imminent deployment, and a notable reduction in routine patrol activity in the areas immediately adjacent to the established tanker transit lane. The last indicator was the most telling. When an adversary clears its own assets out of a zone, it is frequently because something is about to happen in that zone. The commanding officer had read the assessment twice the morning before departure. He did not make speeches. He ordered an accelerated readiness review of every major combat system, confirmed that the vertical launch system cells were loaded at maximum capacity across all available interceptor variants, ensured the CIWS mounts were in calibration, and adjusted the Combat Information Center watch rotation to put his most experienced personnel on the boards during the strait transit window. Quiet, professional acts. The only currency that mattered in the environment he was entering. By 2 a.m., the convoy was 14 nautical miles into the strait. The night was absolute in the way that the Gulf region becomes absolute in the hours before dawn. The sky a depthless black, the horizon completely invisible, the surface of the water perceptible only through the ship's sensor arrays. The bridge ran with minimal lighting. In the Combat Information Center 1 deck below, the world was different in every sense. No natural light, screen glow from every console, the continuous hum of cooling systems fighting to keep the processing cores at operational temperature, the accumulated smell of recycled air and warm electronics that defines a sealed compartment where trained operators have been working at peak cognitive output for extended periods. The Tactical Action Officer, the TAO, had been at his console for 4 hours without a break. He was the nerve center of the ship's combat response, the human link between the Aegis Combat System's automatic processing and the command authority of the commanding officer. He was experienced enough that a quiet radar picture gave him no comfort. The quiet was not reassurance. It was data. And what it told him was simply that nothing had happened yet. At 2:17 a.m., the radar picture changed. The SPY-1D array embedded in the ship's superstructure does not wait. It actively interrogates the surrounding environment thousands of times per second and analyzes what returns. What returned at 2:17 a.m. was not normal. The first contact appeared at 44 nautical miles, bearing 018 degrees, northeast, directly off the Iranian coastline. Altitude profile between 8 and 15 meters above the water surface. Speed approximately 165 kilometers per hour. Before the classification was complete, a second contact appeared, then a third. In a cascade that no operator in the CIC had ever encountered in operational service outside a simulation environment, the radar began generating tracks faster than the watch team could verbally acknowledge them. By the time the TAO called to the combat systems officer to verify what he was seeing, the count had reached 17. By the time the combat systems officer confirmed the sensor feed integrity, a confirmation that took approximately 3 seconds, because a false return anomaly at this density is not a theoretical failure mode. The count had reached 31. By the time the TAO reached his engagement authorization decision point, the radar showed 47 discrete, individually tracked inbound contacts. 47. The Aegis system had already begun its threat assessment cascade, already building fire control solutions, already correlating the flight profiles against its electronic order of battle database. What it returned required no further human analysis. Small loitering munitions, consistent with a Shahed series airframe or comparable domestically produced variant, configured for terminal phase impact delivery. Not reconnaissance, not observation platforms designed to return. Platforms designed to fly to a target and cease to exist upon arrival. 47 of them. Inbound at altitudes designed to exploit the radar horizon and minimize detection time. The TAO ran the engagement math without writing anything down. 47 contacts. Current closure rates placing the leading edge at impact range in 2 minutes and 58 seconds from first detection. Every interceptor launched was a missile that no longer existed in the magazine. Every engagement decision was a calculation being made in a window that was already collapsing. His call came out flat and stripped of every non-essential syllable. Weapons free. All engagement criteria met. Outer ring, commit. The first SM-6 left its VLS cell at 2:18 a.m. and 12 seconds. There is no general description for a VLS launch. The solid-fueled rocket motor ignites in a transition from silence to violence that takes less than a second. The missile accelerates upward at a rate that defeats unaided human visual tracking before it clears the forward deck. The exhaust column drives downward against the blast deflectors, and the entire forward section of the ship shudders. Not catastrophically, but resonantly. A deep vibration transmitted through every frame and deck plate, reminding every person in the CIC that they are not watching a simulation. The deck is real. The fire is real. 3 more SM-6 followed at 2-second intervals. 4 missiles in 8 seconds, arcing north-northeast into the darkness. Their rocket plumes visible on the hull cameras as orange-white streaks accelerating away until the night swallowed them. At 43 nautical miles, 4 radar tracks blinked off the display in rapid succession. 43 contacts remaining. 2 minutes, 11 seconds to impact. But what the Aegis track analysis was now presenting to the TAO changed the character of the entire threat picture. The 47 contacts were not flying a uniform formation and were not executing a single-axis approach. The swarm had architecture. The 4 leading contacts, Satya CIWS, than the ones the SM-6s had just eliminated, had been the fastest and highest flying platforms in the package. They were not the primary strike element. They were the vanguard, designed to force early outer ring interceptor expenditures before the main body arrived. The main body was structured in 3 distinct clusters approaching on divergent bearings: center, starboard bow, and stern, forcing the Aegis system to manage fire control solutions across 3 simultaneous threat axes, rather than concentrating resources against a single corridor. Whoever had designed this attack understood how layered naval missile defense works. They had built the swarm to fight it. At 2:19 a.m., the radar processing rack threw a temperature caution alert. Not a failure. A caution. The Aegis system was running at a processing demand density that the thermal infrastructure was straining to support. 47 initial tracks, multiple simultaneous fire control solutions, continuous track update cycles, threat classification algorithms running in parallel across every active contact. The combat systems officer recognized the alert and made a 4-second decision without reporting it to the TAO. He rerouted primary cooling flow to the fire control processing channels and reduced refresh rates on secondary search sectors. The temperature indicator stabilized. It did not drop back to nominal. The processing load was still too high for that, but it stopped climbing. In those 4 seconds, nobody in the CIC knew yet whether the decision was going to work. The second SM-6 Ripple connected at 31 miles. 3 more contacts eliminated. 7 total neutralized. 40 contacts remaining. The ESSM engagement began 90 seconds from the impact threshold. The evolved Sea Sparrow missiles filled the pre-dawn sky with overlapping white exhaust arcs. 2, 3, 4 launches in rapid sequence, each representing a fire control solution built, validated, and committed in the time it takes to blink. The deck plates transmitted a higher frequency vibration with each ESSM cell cycling, the system working through engagement after engagement with the mechanical efficiency of a platform, doing exactly what it was designed to do in exactly the scenario it was designed for. The track count was falling. Not fast enough. At 2:20 a.m. and 32 seconds, 2 surface contacts appeared on the radar that had not been there a moment before. Small, fast, emerging from the terrain clutter of a section of the Iranian coastline where the system's filtering algorithms had been managing a significant ambient return throughout the transit, apparently sufficient to conceal 2 low-signature composite hull fast attack craft until they had closed to a range where the filtering could no longer exclude them from the track picture. They had not appeared by accident at this moment. They had been timed precisely. They emerged when the ship's engagement systems were maximally committed to the aerial swarm, when the TAO's cognitive load was at its peak, when the complexity of the engagement problem was as high as it had yet been. At 2:20 a.m. and 41 seconds, both craft turned hard to port simultaneously, bringing themselves broadside to the destroyer's position, and released their entire airborne payload in a single, coordinated salvo. 12 new contacts appeared on the radar display. Not from the northeast, where every established engagement solution was already built and queued. From the northwest, a completely fresh threat axis with new approach geometry and fire control solutions required from scratch. The TAO made 3 rapid decisions in 8 seconds. Redirect remaining SM-6 inventory to the northwest axis. Elevate ESSM expenditure rate against the main swarm body, accepting accelerated approach to the CIWS dependency threshold. Activate both CIWS mounts, forward and aft, to automatic engagement mode, bypassing human authorization on final threshold intercepts, because the timeline at that range would not permit an authorization cycle. 8 seconds. 3 irreversible decisions. None of them could be walked back. The sky above the strait at 2:21 a.m. was transformed. Thermal plumes from a dozen intercept engagements hung in the pre-dawn air, slowly dissipating in the thin corridor wind. Detonation flashes lit the water surface at various ranges to the north and northeast, each one marking a kinetic endpoint for an airframe that had been built, transported, and launched specifically for this moment. The redirected SM-6 interceptors caught 3 northwest contacts at 32 miles. 9 remained from the secondary salvo. The ESSM layer caught 6 of those 9 at ranges between 4 and 9 miles. 3 remained, now in terminal phase, below 2 meters altitude, accelerating to sprint velocity for the final geometry of the engagement. Simultaneously, from the main swarm body, 4 contacts had survived the ESSM engagement layer. 7 total terminal phase threats, converging from 2 separate bearing sectors. The CIWS mounts had been in automatic mode since the TAO activated them. The forward mount acquired the 3 northwest contacts. The aft mount acquired 4 northeast contacts. The gun barrels spun to full operational rate in a fraction of a second. The distinctive mechanical shriek of the rotary cannon, at full spin, filling the pre-dawn silence with a sound that every sailor who has heard it at close range describes the same way. Felt in the chest before processed by the ear, the aft mount engaged the 4 northeast contacts at ranges between 40 and 90 meters. 3 were eliminated in a single sustained burst. The 4th contact executed a lateral terminal maneuver, a pre-programmed evasion specifically designed to defeat CIWS, fire control, geometry, by inserting an unpredicted lateral displacement at the moment the gun solution was committed. The aft mount executed a tracking correction. The time available, 1.1 seconds. The mechanical response time required, 0.9 seconds. The engagement recommenced at 62 meters from the hull. Airframe disintegration at that range produced a fragmentation pattern that reached the aft deck plating in a dispersed spread of high-velocity composite and metal fragments. The lookouts stationed aft dropped instinctively. Isomter saws a sharp, instantaneous compression of air registered as a physical force against skin and clothing before the rational mind had processed what caused it. One lookout sustained minor lacerations from secondary fragmentation. No hull penetration. No compromise of any operational system. The forward mount eliminated 2 of the 3 northwest contacts in rapid succession. The 3rd contact dropped below 1 meter altitude in its terminal approach and simultaneously accelerated, forcing a rapid fire control solution recalculation. The aft mount pivoted to support. Both mounts converged on the contact at 11 meters from the hull. 11 meters. The disintegration of the airframe at 11 meters produced a kinetic impact on the port side hull plating audible inside the CIC, as a flat, hard metallic report transmitted through the ship's structure. Topside, every crew member within 20 meters felt the pressure wave as a physical event. Enough physical authority that the damage control team leader on the port bridge wing reached for the nearest structural support before his mind had caught up with the physics of what had just happened. At 2:22 a.m. and 14 seconds, the radar picture cleared. The CIC went quiet in the way that follows maximum intensity. Not peaceful, but emptied. Operators sat back in their seats for the first time since first contact. Some continued staring at their screens, running through post-engagement verification routines, embedded by training below the level of conscious thought. Some were already working the damage report cascade. The TAO stood at his console and looked at the weapons expenditure summary with the stillness of someone who already knew the numbers were not going to be comfortable. 14 SM-6 interceptors expended. 33 ESSMs expended. 7,420 rounds of 20mm tungsten through both CIWS mounts. Total active engagement duration from first launch to final burst, 4 minutes and 50 seconds. The adversary had invested, by intelligence estimates, between $900,000 and $1.4 million to plan, build, and execute the attack, including the operational costs of the fast attack craft, the loitering munition inventory, and the coordination infrastructure that had timed the secondary axis to coincide with peak aerial engagement complexity. The defender had spent approximately $68 million in munitions to defeat it. The ratio of exchange, approximately 49-1 in favor of attack investment efficiency. The ship survived. All 3 tankers survived. Every crew member survived. The mission was accomplished by every applicable operational metric. The fast attack craft that executed the secondary launch had reversed course at maximum speed and were running north inside Iranian territorial waters. They would not be pursued. Pursuit required political authorization that did not exist at the operational level. They disappeared back into the coastal radar clutter that had concealed their approach. They would be there next time. There would be a next time. The 3 tankers crossed the final navigational waypoint of the strait at 3:51 a.m. and entered the Gulf of Oman. The destroyer turned north, beginning its return transit through the corridor it had just defended. The magazine was not what it had been 5 hours earlier. The radar processing rack required engineering evaluation before the next high-tempo operation. A VLS cell that had shown a 2-second firing anomaly during the ESSM phase was red-tagged for maintenance inspection. The lookout was on limited duty. The portside hull plating carried a fragmentation impact pattern requiring formal structural assessment. None of these consequences were catastrophic. All of them were real costs, paid in full by the ship and the crew who held the line. 59 airborne threats detected and tracked across 2 separate launch axes. 0 penetrating hull impacts. 1 destroyer, mission-capable, transiting north. The asymmetric arithmetic of this strait does not resolve after a single engagement. The adversary did not require a tactical success tonight. They required a demonstration that the tactical success of the defender costs $68 million every time it happens, and that the frequency of the engagement is controlled by the attacker, not the defender. The magazine that depleted tonight will be replenished. The crew will recover. But the economic weight of presence in this corridor accumulates with every transit, and the adversary is patient in the specific way that only a force with nothing to lose by waiting can be patient. The ocean does not close the ledger after a single entry, and neither do the men and women who stand at these consoles. Knowing every number, knowing what it costs, and showing up for the next transit anyway, because that is precisely what the watch requires.